Okay, everybody, welcome. Thank you for joining me again on this Wednesday afternoon. My name is Alexis Holguin Juarez, pronoun she, her, ella, and I work for the Institute for Market Transformation. And today we are going to be talking about building energy codes. So this is going to be a 101. That means that this is for anybody who wants to know about building energy codes. If you are a community advocate, if you are a CBO, if you are a government. If you are a tribal nation, we have some tribal specific content after we do the 101. So without further ado, I want to get us started, but I do want to call out some Zoom controls. So we will be having a Q&A at the very end. So you should see a Q&A button at the very bottom, or if you can't access that, you could put your questions into the chat so that we can address it at the very end. So in our hour together, we are going to be going through 3 different topics and then sharing some resources and going through questions. So first, we are going to be talking through what are building energy codes. Then we're going to be talking about the intersections of building energy codes and affordability, health, and climate. And at the very end, we will be discussing the tribal authority to adopt codes, and again, end with some resources and questions. So again, I work for the Institute for Market Transformation, or IMT for short, and we are a nationwide nonprofit that believes in the power of buildings to improve lives. And we do that through a couple different ways. We do that by assisting in developing public policy, mainly for energy efficiency, such as BPS and benchmarking. We do that through community engagement. So we outreach to community leaders that are interested in making buildings better for their communities. We also do that through business engagement, trying to push businesses to create higher performing buildings. And lastly, through utilities and grid, meaning that we outreach to utilities to figure out how they can support higher performing buildings. And I do want to share that this webinar is a part of IMT's new tribal engagement work. So IMT, we are starting tribal engagement to support tribal nations and indigenous communities in navigating climate resilient buildings. And we're trying to provide specific types of support for tribal nations and indigenous communities, such as support with building energy codes, for example, like this webinar, but also some other things like for tribal nations that are interested in developing policy to track and reduce energy use, or organizations, tribal nations, and individuals that are interested in engaging their local utility, or figuring out community-driven planning and community engagement. So this is the launch of our engagement program. But I want to get to the meat and potatoes and talk more about why y'all are here building energy codes. So let's kick it off with a quick definition. What are building energy codes? So building energy codes establish the minimum efficiency requirements for new buildings and major renovations. They cover things like insulation, windows, HVAC equipment, lighting, water heating, and air sealing. And I have a couple graphics to show more concretely how do building energy codes show up in different types of buildings that we may occupy. So we have on the left a more commercial building, multi-story commercial building, and on the right we have a residential building. And building energy codes can show up in different aspects of each of these buildings. Things like dimmers and daylight controls, energy efficient windows, programmable thermostats, things like HVAC and making sure your HVAC is properly sized for your buildings, but also things more on the construction side, such as tight construction, insulation, proper sealing, insulated piping, and then also lighting. So building energy codes show up in multiple different ways, and it really depends on your building and where you live, and that dictates how they show up. So I want to discuss who writes the energy code. When we're talking about the energy code, there are 2 main players. The first player is the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning, or ASHRAE, and the second player is the International Code Council. So first, let's talk about ASHRAE and what they do. So they write something called Standard 90.1, and this is for commercial buildings, which is all buildings that don't fall under residential. Under this definition of commercial buildings, it does include places where people live, but generally larger multifamily buildings. So this is what ASHRAE does. They write an energy standard for commercial buildings, which includes what you traditionally think of commercial buildings, such as businesses, and also large-scale multifamily residential, like large apartment complexes. And next we have the ICC. So they write something called the International Energy Conservation Code, or the IECC. And that covers commercial under the same definition, which may include large-scale multifamily residential, and it covers residential such as single-family homes, duplexes, and smaller apartments. And since the IECC covers both residential and commercial, they can adopt the standard 90.1 or look to that when they're writing their own code. So these are the two entities that write codes for different types of buildings. And I understand that codes is not the most interesting thing in the world. I understand that energy efficient windows is not the most interesting thing, but there are real tangible benefits and consequences when you're thinking about energy codes. So when you are adopting and updated energy codes, it makes the buildings where your community lives healthier, more energy affordable, and climate conscious. And this, in turn, makes more resilient communities and nations. So now I want to talk about the intersections, or each of these intersections between health, affordability, and climate. And I want to kick it off with health. So, how do energy codes affect health? They affect health because the average American spends about 90% of their time indoors. This means that the built environment, or the buildings where we live, play, generally occupy, have a very high potential to affect our physical and mental wellness. And this effect is more pronounced for specific communities, such as BIPOC, Indigenous, low-income communities, who may already be predisposed to certain health conditions, such as hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and asthma. So there are two ways that energy codes show up in your health. Number one, they influence things like moisture control. So when you control moisture, heat, and airflow, you prevent the development of hazards such as mold, mildews, and rots that are detrimental to your health. They also influence indoor air quality because when you have a properly sized HVAC, which is defined in something like a building energy code, you reduce exposure to common indoor air pollutants like radon, ozone, nitrogen dioxide. And also you can ensure fresh airflow during climatic events such as wildfires. So next, I want to go through energy codes and affordability. And I want to spend some time on affordability so that y'all can walk away with 3 different metrics to assess how energy codes can affect the cost of your building over time. So before I actually get into affordability, I want to preface with how often the codes are updated. So building energy codes, inclusive of ASHRAE and IECC, are updated every few years. And with each update, the energy code requires construction or renovations with higher energy efficiency. When you have higher energy efficiency, you eventually have lower energy bills. This is because you will have the same outputs, meaning thermal comfort of your home or living in a building that can temperature regulate with using less energy, and that leads to lower energy bills. But I do want to be transparent. When you are adopting new codes, this will modestly increase construction costs, but the costs are generally offset over time through lower utility bills. And these costs are generally assessed through 3 different metrics that I'm going to go into more on the next slide. And these metrics are life cycle cost, or LCC, simple payback, and cash flow analysis. So what are these metrics? Let's start with life cycle cost. So life cycle cost is just the reported savings over a building's life cycle. This is usually quantified over 30 years. Simple payback is the number of years required for savings to make up for construction costs. And cash flow analysis summarizes the net cash flow in the early years of a building's life cycle. So there's also something called climate zone. And this is a screenshot from a PNNL report, the National Cost Effectiveness of Residential Provisions, and that report was shared into the chat. And climate zone is important when you are thinking about building energy codes because it determines the level of savings over your building's life cycle. And this is because not all energy efficiency measures are equally effective across all climate zones. So I want to go through an example to talk about how do we actually think about affordability in action. And in this example, I want to go through you switching from something like the 2021 IECC residential code to the most recent 2024 IECC residential code in a specific climate zone. In this example, we're going to be choosing climate zone 5A. So that green band on the map that's in the Midwest/Northeast area. So if you are in this climate zone and if you are switching from 2021 to 2024, you will have a life cycle savings cost of about $2,500. And this means that over 30 years of your building, you will save about $2,500 per unit over your building's life cycle. Now, with the same example, again, switching from 2021 to 2024 residential code, let's look at the simple payback. So the thing that is highlighted here in this chart is 0, which means that within the first year, savings of adopting the 2024 IECC will make up additional construction costs, which means that within 0 years, within the first year, you will make up the additional cost of updating the code. And the last metric, which is the cash flow analysis, shows 154. And what does this mean? This means that within the first year, you will recoup construction costs and generate $154 of savings if you change from the 2021 IECC code to the 2024 IECC code in climate zone 5A. So this example was very specific. Again, it was 2021 to 2024. But what do savings look like when you're starting from an energy code older than 2021, or if you're a tribal nation that doesn't have an established energy code? Well, it's really dependent on your climate zone and where you're starting from. So the ICC is updated every 3 years, and it's developed to incorporate more energy efficiency and savings over time, which means that a switch from 2021 to 2024, such as our example, is going to look very different compared to 2015 to 2024, or if you're starting from no energy code at all. So your affordability will need to be assessed depending on what code you're starting from and the climate zone that you are living in. So next, I want to go through energy codes and climate. So energy codes, they connect with climate in 2 main ways. Number 1, they reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So unless you power your buildings with 100% renewable energy, all building energy produces some type of emissions. And again, when you have higher energy efficiency, you have less energy use, and you have lower carbon emissions. And energy codes can also make your buildings more resilient against climate, because energy efficiency measures, such as better insulation and air sealing, they help buildings stay at a comfortable temperature during power outages. For example, I live in the Southwest in El Paso, Texas, and it's about 102, or it's going to go up to 102 today. And if the power goes out, it is very important that I have a building that is sealed properly so that I could maintain thermal comfort despite it being 102 outside. So I do realize this was quite a bit of information, and I want to pause here to do a quick poll to understand your top concerns when adopting and advocating for energy codes. So let me launch this poll real quick and give you all a couple minutes. Okay, lovely. So for the folks that are interested in these various topics, feel free to shoot questions at the very end, because we have enough time to do a Q&A live discussion to discuss these different metrics. So now I want to get through the tribal authority to adopt and implement energy codes. And to start that off, I want to talk about the ecosystem of energy codes. So there are different types of governments throughout the United States, and they all have different authorities to adopt and develop energy codes. And I want to start with tribal governments. So tribal building codes, inclusive of energy codes, are defined first and foremost by the tribe. As sovereign nations, tribes have the ability to redefine or refine the purpose, scope, goals, and design of the built environment to guide and manage construction on tribal lands. State and local energy codes do not apply in tribal lands unless the tribe adopts state or local energy codes. The next type of government is the federal government, and there are no national energy codes in the United States. So this means that the federal government delegates that authority to develop and implement codes to state governments. And in turn, state governments have the authority to set statewide building codes, set minimums or maximum code requirements that either cannot be exceeded by a local jurisdiction or give the local jurisdiction complete control over whether to adopt a code, when to adopt it, and what code they choose to adopt. So states have a lot of authority in dictating what codes are present throughout the United States. And lastly, we have our local jurisdictions, and these are your cities and counties, and their authority really depends on the state. They may or may not have the authority to adopt a code, or they may need to adhere to code minimums or maximums. This is very dependent if the state practices Dillon's rule or home rule. And we have a couple resources that we're going to be sharing at the end that further explains the difference between Dillon's rule or home rule. So I want to go through an example for tribal nations that are trying to navigate, well, we want to build a building, but we aren't sure if there's an energy code we need to adhere to, or we want to develop our own. So I want to provide an example where a tribal nation is building a building, and the first thing when navigating energy codes is that you need to ask yourself if the building site is on tribal lands. This includes trust lands, fee lands, restricted tribal lands. If the answer is yes, then the next question you ask is, does the tribal government have an adopted building energy code? If that is yes, then you should defer to that tribal code. If the answer is no, then a code is not required, but IMT, we highly encourage building or renovating to some type of energy code standard due to the benefits I stated earlier of climate affordability and health. Or if this tribal nation is somewhere in the middle, that they don't have a code, but they're interested in developing one, or they kind of just defer to the local or state code, you can reach out to IMT. We can assist with you navigating a tribal code or educating decision makers within your tribal nation if a tribal energy code is right for you and your government. So if the answer is no, that you are not building on tribal trust lands or fee lands, then the next question you ask is, does the state government have an adopted statewide building energy code or code maximums or minimums? If the answer is yes, you need to defer to that state code, the maximums or minimums. If the answer is no, then you should defer to the local city code. Again, it may include maximums or minimums. If you're unsure whether or not your state government has a statewide building energy code or maximums and minimums, you could also reach out to IMT. That is also something we could assist you with, and we could connect you potentially with local jurisdictions that may have some assistance while you are constructing your building. So I do want to share some resources into the chat that kind of encompasses all this information we just went through. So the first resource is how energy codes affect you. This is the infographic that I shared at the very beginning, but it goes a little bit more in depth of what all these terms mean, such as energy efficient windows. We also have Part 1 of the Code Adoption Toolkit, Taking Action for Stronger Energy Codes. This is a resource that provides a 101 of what are energy codes, and it goes a little bit deeper on differences between state, Dillon's rule versus home rule, and what states adhere to what type of standards. Lastly, we have something called the Equitable Decarb Learning Series, or the EDLS, and these are a series of infographics that are printable and that describe things that are much more inclusive than codes. They describe all the ways that the built environment can affect you and your community, inclusive of health, of affordability, of climate. And these are wonderful if you are going through educational campaigns trying to figure out how the built environment affects you and your community. But yes, that is the end of our webinar. Thank y'all so much for spending the afternoon with us. And y'all should receive a email with the webinar recording in about a week or so. Thanks, everybody.